But can we do any questions?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
You take as many questions as you want, but then when you're done, they can meet you out there.
Okay, fair enough. I came in town for this, so got nowhere else to be. All right, anybody? Can we get a mic there? Oh, well, him first, then him. Yes, sir.
Yes, by the way, great speech. I was sitting over here taking notes going, if I can remember half of that, that's amazing.
Oh, it's okay. I won't either.
Yeah, Mark Luther with Asking Global Consulting Firm. So regarding, Agenda 2030, UN, SDGs, what is, how do you kind of see that playing out over the next 9 years leading up to 2030 and how blockchain can really help drive some of the sustainability goals around the world?
Yeah, we think a lot about the SDGs because it comes up a lot in the meetings we have, especially in Africa. I mean, the fourth industrial revolution, blockchain is a component, but it's not the only component. You also have artificial intelligence, IoT, and other such things like emerging business models. The value of blockchain in transforming businesses and society is really stemming around, well, what is it? It's not a database. It's a ledger that allows you to put stuff in it that's immutable, time-stamped, and auditable. Okay, so it doesn't replace Oracle or MySQL or these things. It's complementary in that it's a checker of things. So what you do is you say, okay, which things in the SDG do you care about that need to be checked and verified? And that could be, okay, what process do you have, for example, for clean drinking water? What process do you have to ensure rule of law, real-time continuous auditing of foreign aid or accounts or these things? And you say, okay, well, is there a way that we can put that in a place, a blockchain, so that it can be checked? How do you build a business logic for that? And it's actually quite relevant for globalization, which is the single hardest component for developing nations. So when you look at things like, for example, when Starbucks says we're only going to buy environmentally sustainable fair trade coffee, that's extremely hard on the subsistence farmer who's smallholder farmer in Ethiopia who lives on a hectare, and his whole model is the same model his dad and his grandfather and everyone else has done, where they take the beans they put on the back of a donkey and they ride it to the washing station. How in bloody hell does he prove he's paying a fair wage and all these other things? It's just such a Western way of looking at this and say, oh, look, we're doing all this good. Now, actually, you're hurting a lot of people when you do that. So you need to upgrade the system, and you need to build some sort of supply chain, but then you actually need digital identity under that supply chain. Then you actually need some sort of wallet infrastructure underneath that supply chain. But actually, you need connectivity. Oh, by the way, only 4% of people in that area have connectivity. Oh, okay. You see, so what's great about when you start the solutioning with blockchain is you actually take a step back. So for example, we funded and worked with a connectivity startup called World Mobile. We did some seed money. Now they've done a $40 million round, and they're inventing a new way of doing 5G in Zanzibar. And they're trying to figure out how do we create like a micro ISP model where you can provide internet to your neighbor and have different incentives for this. Because if we can get that right, like M-Pesa, it can take off throughout Africa. And then what that'll enable is connections. Once you have connectivity, then you can actually have a real conversation about digital identity, digital money, digital wallets. But then and only then can you do that. It's a necessary component, but not yet sufficient for it. So there are other things to think about in the Sustainable Development Goals too. So for example, how do you measure the level of success and who measures that? And that's always been a big bugbear in the international community of audit, oversight, and credibility, and especially in an age where we don't trust institutions anymore. So oh yeah, well, that institution measured that, I don't trust that, and so forth. So then it forces you to start having more realistic and reasonable conversations about power sharing and oversight agreements. And again, a blockchain is perfect for that. The medical records question is just a great example to understand it. It's not about the medical records themselves living on a blockchain. It's about the access control for those things. So I travel all the time, and let's say when we go to Zanzibar next month, one of those 5G towers falls on me. It's like, oh well, we'll sue World Mobile later. But I'm all crushed and messed up, and I'm unconscious, and they take me to the hospital, and the local doctor there is like, well, let's call the guys in Colorado and get his medical records to figure out how to treat him. And so they call up, and they're like, hey, this is the doctor in Zanzibar. I need all of Charles Hoskinson's medical records. Can you send him my way? Oh, no, he can't talk to you. He's unconscious. I'm sorry, I don't have his social security number. Yeah, I can't. But he really, really needs help. I mean, how does that work? And it's such a simple and easy to understand problem, but it's the exact same type of problem to many other of these problems of People need to trust each other for our benefit, whether it's in the telecommunications space or the healthcare space, from the individual level to the corporate level for roaming agreements, all the way up to the government oversight. So when you talk about STG, you also have to talk about audit and oversight, and then the who watches the watchers component. And every single one of these things, a ledger is helpful. It's not the end-all be-all, but it's that foundational thing that you can put trust, identity, auditability in, and you can't change it after it's inside the system. That's what makes people trust this thing. They say, okay, well, if it's there, I know nobody's messed with it and tampered with it. It's safe. Next question.
Charles, thank you. My name's Joe Bagnano. I'm co-founder of a startup focused on helping individuals that have lost their private key use smart contracts to actually liquidate and crack into that value. Thanks for this presentation. I think if I can't speak for everyone, but it's got my adrenaline going. This is the kind of stuff that I think we all want to hear. I can feel the energy, or I perceive the energy, so thank you very much for the statements that you've made. It's really encouraging to a lot of us. My question is, we always talk about sort of resistance to blockchain and cryptocurrencies because of lack of knowledge. In addition to that, what are your thoughts around resistance in terms of a perceived lack of, or a perceived loss of power and influence and wealth that may be associated with that? Because I think a lot of us see blockchain as a great equalizer. That equalization means that maybe I'll have less power, maybe I'll have less wealth. Is that a factor, and is that something that someone should be, these maybe power brokers or whatever,
Right.
should be concerned about, and is that part of the resistance? And thank you.
You're always going to have, like you invent the car and then people say, oh, but what will happen to the horse trainers? You invent the refrigerator and they say, what happens to the ice delivery guy? You invent the internet, what happens to the newspaper? I guess this building is a little worried about that. But it's a good question. It's an interesting question. We run into a lot when we do business in the developing world, because a lot of the endemic corruption you see in the developing world is structural. So they build institutions and ways of doing business that benefit power brokers who are sometimes multi-generational. And so you walk in and you say, well, God, if you go and change these systems, like you're taking money out of the pocket of very dangerous people. Are you sure that's a safe thing to do? Or they're actually going to let you do that? Well, yes, because when you change the institution, the net creation of wealth is significantly greater. Look at when we went from communism to capitalism in Russia, then we got all these oligarchs flying around in private jets and yachts and buying the New York Nets and all these other things, right? They're making much more money and living much better under capitalism, or at least some variant of it, than they were under the old corrupt guard of the Soviet Union. So it's a mindset change where you say, okay, how do we apply these things in a way that allow existing interests to still survive and thrive, but do so in a way where they now have to be fair for everybody. And when they're fair, they end up creating a situation where you end up making more money than you would under the corrupt system. Don't believe me? Okay, set up shop somewhere where everybody lives off $1 a day, and set up shop where everybody lives off of $200 a day. Where do you think your convenience store is going to have more sales? Just that simple. And so would you rather have one monopoly and a single store in a poor economy, or would you rather compete with 3, 4, 5, 10 vendors and where everybody has a lot of spending cash? You will always make money in the competitive environment, more than you would in the monopolized environment. But some people, they just don't get that, and they age out, and what usually ends up happening is the young people kill them. It's true. Every violent revolution and every political revolution we've seen has come from when the dictators or the people who have the entrenched interests become myopic, and they adopt this let them eat cake mentality. Either it's King Louis XVI, or it's the Tsar in Russia, or Batista in Cuba. They basically think that the people are just going to accept being screwed, and then eventually people get so angry that some small event happens, and then you have an Arab Spring style event that cascades its way through. I never in my lifetime would thought that Gaddafi was going to get killed, and in hindsight it was obvious. The same for Mubarak and all these other people that have been disposed. And I'm sure people felt the exact same way in the 1950s in Cuba and other places. So there's always those two tensions of you can educate and say, well, these new systems, if you work with them and embrace change, life gets better for everybody, including you. And if you don't work with them, at some point your people are going to understand that there are problems here, and they're really going to get tired of the way that those systems work. And they'll ask you politely first, and then they'll hold protest, and then you shoot at them in the protest, and then they start shooting back, and then you start discovering that there's more of them than you, and then all of a sudden they're in charge, not you. And that's the arc of human history. I'd like to believe in the 21st century we can get away from that. Unfortunately, the last 20 years have been pretty terrible, and hopefully we can improve things in the next 20 years, but it changes mindset. The other thing that really bothers me is when you notice people that consistently spread misinformation, and for some reason the institutions seem to give them an elevated platform. Paul Krugman is a great example of that. The dude has been wrong since the fax machine. Seriously. Take his Nobel Prize away, goddammit. I mean, honestly, if he can't understand the value of being able to push value anywhere in the world instantly to anyone with no counterparty risk and say that that's a scam, then I have no idea how the field of economics works. Guys, we've created the most universal form of finance with the cryptocurrency space. You can do lending products, insurance products. You can do IPOs at a scale of $5,000 instead of $200 million. You can do it all in one universal system. And eventually the transaction fees will be near free because of layer 2 networks. And oh, and by the way, you can put inside the transaction itself metadata and contractual relationships, identity, terms and conditions in the predicates, automated regulation. You can get rid of the entire compliance desk of JP Morgan Chase with just one innovation that this space has. And there's 500 others. And that same thing runs your voting system and your property ledger. That same thing runs every aspect of an economy. And to say that this is just like, it's an ephemeral thing, it'll die off and so forth, yet he gets in the New York Times and so forth. So I feel your frustration too. It's my frustration, it's a shared frustration. But you know, the kings of today are the clowns of the past. So they have their time and their presence, and either they're going to adapt and change and grow and learn, or we'll just remember them fondly for the things they said and did.
Hi, Ryan Williams, Blockchain Academy. There's a ton of enthusiasm. You're no longer having a cup of coffee with yourself, but tens of thousands of people around the globe. My question is, we're constantly talking about education, and we're having these conferences, but when the rubber meets the road in terms of actual skill to put this into play, what is Cardano doing in the space? Are you thinking certifications in terms of ecosystem development? What's your route?
Okay, so the first question is, what are you running on chain, what are you running off chain? I think it's bloody insane to try to build some sort of distributed virtual machine in the sky because it's a replicated system. That's the point of these systems, at least in their instantiation. Blockchains are really good proof checkers. They're not good computers. So one of the first problems with Ethereum is this whole world computer ideology. It basically assumes that you have some way of distributing computation and certain nodes are running different computing than other nodes, but yet somehow you're able to verify all of that. It's a really hard problem. And usually what ends up happening is they can't solve it, so in practice what they do is they actually just have centralized solutions for everything, and they have a thin piece of software that actually runs on chain with Solidity or something like that. And those centralized services that are off chain, they're basically vulnerable. You know, they're not really well audited. They have perhaps information security problems, and they get hacked all the time. Okay, and then the on-chain stuff also has the same problem. So we've had a lot of conversations with people in the formal methods world, like runtime verification and CertiK, and we've done a lot of our own work internally. We work with Twig. QVIC is another firm. They do property-based testing. And the first question is, can you build great standards? So can you write a specification for smart contracts that's code agnostic? And then once you've proven that the specification is correct, show that the code that's deployed both off-chain and on-chain has some sort of certification. This is called formal verification, and it's commonly done in the aerospace industry and other places. And there are some product lines in the Ethereum space and in our space that are emerging and materializing. They're not very big, and usually people do these things because of insurance and liability protection. You seldom build fences and hire security guards for your warehouse because you think it's a good thing to do. You do it because you can't get an insurance policy on the things in the warehouse unless you demonstrate you're following some baseline of security and protection. Bruce Nyer mentions this a lot in a lot of his literature. So analogously, when you look at the cryptocurrency space in the absence of regulation and liability, there aren't strong incentives in the space for software quality. And that's a consistent problem that we're facing, and that's why the DAO hack happens and all these other things occur. One of the reasons we built Cardano the way we built it with Plutus and extended UTXO is it just happens that that particular model is significantly easier to verify against specifications and standards. For example, resource determinism or termination of a program, or verifying that Alice will always be paid and no other person will be paid, like somebody can do some sort of reentrancy attack and so forth. It's not to say you can't do this with imperative programming, but it's a lot harder in practice. So one of the things we're going to do next year, my company, is we're working with an academic partner, we haven't announced the exact one yet, to set up a smart contract engineering institute. And basically, we'll put a few $1 million into it, we'll syndicate some other blockchains into it, and the idea would be just getting some baseline things figured out. Okay, so things like standards. How do you standardize SushiSwap? So DEX behavior, how do you standardize an Oracle feed? How do you standardize certain design patterns and behaviors that are commonly used again and again and again in the space? Then, what verification tools should we invest in to actually verify that software has been correctly implemented? Okay, whether it be a Solidity program or a Michelson program or it be a Plutus script or something like that. And then the other question is, how do you get governments involved, insurance companies involved, security auditors involved, and start talking about the certification and accreditation pipeline? So everybody says, my smart contract is audited. But it gets back to the who watches the watcher. What credentials and certification capabilities does the auditor actually have outside of perhaps the brand of Kadelsky or these other people that commonly do things in our space? And also, are they ubiquitously certified? There's a world of difference between certifying a DEX and certifying ZK rollups and layer 2 solutions involving zero-knowledge cryptography. The complexity of those things is orders of magnitude beyond what you would see in a simple liquidity pool or something like this. So you need to have layers of accreditation, layers of software certification and so forth, and ultimately it's all down to value at risk. That's the key factor. We do that in every other industry. The first thing a Fortune 500 company is always going to ask whenever you do anything is, if it blows up, who gets fired and how much money is lost and how many people die? And if the answer is the CEO gets fired, 1 million people die, and it's $1 billion, you better believe they'll have a whole fucking department working on it. If they say it's Bob from accounting and don't worry about it, it's like, yeah, okay, maybe we won't. You see, so it's always about value at risk at the end of the day. And it could be privacy value, it can be the integrity and brand of the system, it can be monetary value, and so forth. It would be nice, as an engineer, for you guys to have the ability to map that to an actual verification level and say, okay, for this VAR, it's level 1. For this one, it's level 2. And every time you escalate, the burden of proof increases. Maybe you need multiple certified auditors. Maybe you need proof objects. Maybe you need a formal specification, a formal verification, these types of things. Maybe you can only run in certain environments with certain levels of security. Like, for example, infrastructural risk. If you're running a $5 billion contract, but your underlying infrastructure is $1 million of security, one of these things is not like the other. So maybe you have to run it on something like Bitcoin or Ethereum or Cardano because there's so much value that's at risk, even though it's more expensive to run it on that underlying infrastructure. So that's what we're doing is we've built great technology. We have great academic partnerships. University of Edinburgh is where our flagship lab is. And I mean, that's where Phil Wadler is and all these other guys. And they've been doing formal methods and verification for decades. But if it's us, it won't get done. It needs to be the entire industry, and how you do that is you create an institute specifically for the entire industry, and then you gradually keep adding more and more. And if you're lucky, it becomes the standard for everyone.
Hello, Charles. Felipe Puente, HSBC Mexico. I have a question.
I'm a customer, by the way, of HSBC.
Oh, thank you. With your work in Africa and some of the work you've been seeing in the developing world, how do you see what can developing countries do to weather the storm when it comes to like the Financial Action Task Force and their gray list, or like what the IMF is trying to potentially do punitively to El Salvador? Like, how can they weather the storm so they don't get de-incentivized to actually continue?
Okay, so I have strong opinions about some of the things in El Salvador, but I won't get into that. FATF is an interesting animal. So this is an example of where if you just look at a problem slightly differently, you actually have a win-win for everybody. So if I'm a user of an exchange, it's in my best interest that people can't steal my money off the exchange. And I know by using an exchange, I already have to go through KYC and AML. It's not an unreasonable thing then to say, well, well, I'm going through KYC and AML, why don't we create a cryptographic artifact? Let's call it a DID, a decentralized identifier. And you register that with the exchange, and then you say, okay, if I want to withdraw my money, I have to sign the withdrawal address with my DID. Now, you're not actually exposing any more privacy or anything like that, because the only person who even knows the mapping of that DID is the exchange, and you've already given your passport to the exchange. And what's happened is the exchange is now in full compliance with the travel rule, because they can show that every flow of funds in and out is end-to-end KYC'd for the system, even with privacy coins. And for you, the consumer, what you've gained is an additional layer of security, because if your account is compromised, they're not going to have the private key for your DID. That's stored locally. Okay? So they can't actually create the credential necessary to remove the money from the account. So it's like two-factor authentication, effectively. So these are the kinds of win-wins that we have to think about as an industry of what can we do to keep FATF and other people happy, but at the same time improve the customer experience and improve the customer security so that they can better magic keys. I really admire the work you're doing if you're saying we're trying to solve the problem of people losing their private keys. I mean, when Mark Zuckerberg created Facebook, it took him a little while to understand the notion that he needed to figure out what to do when someone dies. Why? Because he's a college student. No one dies. They're all young, right? It's like a rare thing. But when you get a little older, so you start losing friends and like, yeah, what do we do for estate planning and all these things? So they had to kind of figure that out in the technology. And Bitcoin is the same problem. Like all the guys who started working on this stuff, they're pretty young. Then Hal Finney died. Probably had thousands and thousands of Bitcoin floating around. So how does that work if they don't have access to the private keys and so forth? So the same kinds of things that could solve that could also help with laws and regulations behind estate planning, for example, or other such things. And so these are the examples of the proactive conversations that need to be had. And I think that a lot of things can be automated, and I think a lot of things can be done to make compliance officers happy. Compliance officers normally in legacy world, cash world, they don't get to do KYT. You guys do with cryptocurrencies, and there's Chainalysis, Elliptic, all these other vendors and solutions. So it turns out that the level of information you can provide in a SAR is significantly higher than the level of information that you can provide with most of the transactions you're probably seeing in Chihuahua and other places. That's a win for the regulator, for the customer, and for the system's integrity itself. And so these are the kinds of intersections I think you should look for. Next question.
Hi, Charles.
Good to meet you.
Yeah, it's Eric Kasinga. I'm from the Congo.
From
so
Congo.
I like the fact that you will be touring Africa.
You know,
So
I might be going to Rwanda, by the way.
I'm inviting you to the Congo. So Rwanda is just next door.
You know, Felix did too, but we don't have time on this tour, but we will go. It's a beautiful country.
Please do, yeah. So I'm into plastic waste upcycling, and we're trying to incentivize, plastic pickers, plastic collectors, so that they benefit from our activities. And I would like to know, what would be your advice to young Africans as far as blockchain is concerned? Because in Africa, we're suffering from lack of infrastructures, lack of internet, the right internet. I mean, your internet is very fast here. I've never seen this. So lack of funding.
Yeah.
And also corrupt leadership in most of the countries. So what would be your advice to young Africans who want to implement, blockchain technology in Africa with all these issues that I just mentioned above?
Yeah, this is a question we get a lot, and we actually do startups. We have partners like iSatis. They're in 25 countries in Africa, and we see tons of startups in Africa. And I love investing in them because they're, statistically speaking, better investments than any investment in Silicon Valley. It's a game of numbers, and by volume and quality, investment size, and so forth, it all just works out. And also, if you look at pre-COVID, the growth of places like Ethiopia, for example, we're most familiar because that's where our flagship is. We have about 40 people in Ethiopia. The GDP was growing 10 to 15% per year. If you look at the SMEs in particular, the cash reserves, the balance sheets that they had, the stability of the business models, and compare them to Iowa and compare them to other places, they actually look better. And it's just remarkable. You have this idea, oh, well, how do we start from bedrock and build our way out? It turns out that there's already amazing entrepreneurship and progress that's being done. The magic superpower of our industry is that it gives people the means to create themselves. That's really what you have to do to lift people up. So you start with very foundational things like identity. Okay, and I'm super passionate about that. That's one of our largest product lines with Atala Prism. We have about 5 million users in Ethiopia. That's probably going to grow to 20 to 40 million across the continent within the next 24 months. Every time you give somebody identity, you've now given them the ability to prove to the world that they're worth something, to build a reputation, to show their credentials, their work history, their skill sets, and so forth. It's kind of like when the internet allowed for outsourcing, suddenly you had all these coders from Lagos and other places. They come online and they start making Western salaries working for American companies because they happen to be just as good as a Western engineer. Equal pay for equal work. And they're competitive. You know, they actually have the skills to do these types of things. So the starting point is always identity. And then once you have that, then you could start having direct foreign investment, lower microfinance rates. And then it's a question of, okay, how do you attract the entrepreneurial class to actually create things? And the challenge there, it is a public-private partnership. The part of the burden on the private side is they got to do the job. They take the risk, they do the work, they get their asses kicked, they work 90 hours a week, they get a few divorces. It's never a fun experience, right? And then the part on the government side is get the hell out of the way. Okay, so you have to create a competitive business environment, special economic zones. You have to create regulations that actually allow you to do your job. Now, here in the United States, we've done this for cryptocurrencies in the state of Wyoming. It's actually a correction. We're not in Hong Kong. We're in Wyoming. Input Output Global is Wyoming-based C corporation. We reverse merged from Hong Kong back into the U.S. And 26 laws have been passed that are pro-crypto in Wyoming. It's brought Avanti Bank, the Speedy Banks, Kraken, others in our industry have come. Billions of dollars of capital have flown into Wyoming as a direct consequence of these laws that have been passed. Now think of this. Wyoming is not exactly the place you think about when you say, I want to create a high-value technology startup with a bunch of cowboys out in Cheyenne. Turns out it's a lot more fun than Austin or any of these other places. So yeah, the public side is they have to create the right regulatory environment, and that's a combination of certainty, rule of law, predictability, special economic zones, and so forth. And there's several great examples that we've seen throughout the continent of Africa where this has worked exceedingly well. Then in terms of access to capital, it's a lot easier today than it was 20 years ago, but I freely admit it's extremely hard. And I see the bias myself. I go to Silicon Valley and other places. We tell them about the work we're doing in Africa. The consensus we usually get is, oh, that sounds like a good way to lose a lot of money. I was like, screw you guys. But if there's any light at the end of the tunnel, if you went to somebody in 1975, 1980, and said, hey guys, I think this China thing is going to be big, they'd think you're bloody crazy. And now it's one of the world's largest economies, right? So who's on bottom can be on top very quickly. And what you have to look at are the trends. People noticed that there was a movement from Maoism, where they were going from everything was about me, the state, to we, and an opening of the economy. Now Xi is moving from we back to me, so it's moving the other direction. So China is now a much less attractive investment. But even China recognizes the value in Africa. There's over $1 trillion of direct foreign investment from China across all of Africa. And we run into them in Zambia and Zimbabwe and other places. I was in Ethiopia. I drove by a town where all the signs were in Mandarin. You wouldn't think of that, but I saw it. It's like, whoa. There's definitely trends in Africa that, to me, indicate it's the next China in terms of economic growth. You have a very young population. 70% of the population of Ethiopia, for example, is at or under the age of 30. They're extremely well educated, relatively speaking, and they have access to the internet. They're digital natives. So every time they want to learn something, they learn it very quickly, and they can do things at a cost that's usually an order of magnitude lower than their Western counterparts. They work hard. So those are the kinds of factors that you say, well, the businesses of the future are probably going to be African, and those, when they get their billion customers, are going to be just as big as Microsoft and Facebook and so forth. So that's the last piece of the puzzle, is the brand part of the puzzle. And the only way to win that is for an African entrepreneur to become as rich as Bill Gates. So maybe it's you. Maybe it's somebody else. But that's how you win that fight. And then people say, yeah, that guy, yeah, he did it. Everybody else could do it. So that gets people out of that learned hopelessness. That gets people out of that cycle and inspires people. And then the imitators come, thousands and thousands and thousands. And that's what creates an entire industry and so forth. And usually you do it on leapfrog technology. So you're probably not going to win in the steel manufacturing world. But you sure as hell could win in the blockchain world. And that's going to create a lot of the jobs of the future and so forth, and probably more valuable jobs than steel ever did. Okay, that's an old business. That's a dying. You can buy steel from us. We'll sell it to you good. Okay, so those are my abstract thoughts on the matter. Now, Congo in particular has always been a difficult situation. There's been a lot of bad stuff that's happened, especially from Europe, and it's just damn tragic. Obviously, there were some terrible wars that you and your family have lived through, and my heart really does go out to it. But you never let it dissuade you. I'll close with this. When I went to Kigali in Rwanda, one of the things that really touched me was I visited the genocide museum that was there. And this was a horrible genocide. 100 days, 1 million people died. And it was so terribly efficient because everybody had a national ID card and it said Tutsi or Hutu, and they just checked the cards. If you're Tutsi, they kill you at the checkpoints. So somehow they had to figure out how to put a country back together after that terrible tragedy. And what really blew me away is when I went to the museum, the guy at the front desk was Hutu, and the person who was the janitor who was cleaning the place was Tutsi. The guy at the front desk killed the janitor's wife and kids, and they worked together and eat lunch together every day. It was just inconceivable to me. How do people get together and forgive? And I asked, and they said, well, it's quite simple. If we can't forgive, no one can forgive, and that means it's going to happen again. So a whole nation state just woke up and said, okay, the past is the past, let's move on and find a different way of doing things. No matter how personally hard it is and how much it hurts, forgiveness is the key. So there's been a lot of problems in our own nation, throughout the continent of Africa, throughout the world. Humans are terrible to each other. But that doesn't mean we have to be terrible to each other. And you accomplish so much more with empathy, love, and understanding than you ever can through conflict. So stay optimistic and believe in the better angels of our nature. That's the final piece of advice I can give. All right, next question.
Raphael, Minnesota Blockchain Initiative. I know we're all here to talk about blockchain, but my question is more, if the WHO and the UN and the IMF called you tomorrow and said, okay, we love what you're doing, and we see the reach that you can have to the 2 billion unbanked or the billion people that don't technically live anywhere because they don't have digital identity, what would you need off-chain in terms of resources from the global community to make this vision for the future that we all want to be a part of possible?
Well, I don't think I need anything. What we just need is for them to kind of get out of the way. I mean, this is kind of like Tesla with battery-powered cars. Well, the brilliance of Elon Musk wasn't that Elon Musk was brilliant. The brilliance of Elon Musk was that he's really good at following trends. Every super rich guy and gal, they tend to be good at that. Okay, they hire the inventors and the brilliant people. Okay, and they take the credit for them. So what did Elon recognize? He said, hang on a second here. Everybody's got cell phones. And everybody's got like laptops, and everybody's got tablets and all these other things. And what do you want with your cell phone and your tablet? You want it to charge faster, you want it to be lighter, you want the battery to last longer, and you want the battery life to be longer. So you have four thing factors that basically mean that just by natural competitive evolution in a multi-billion-dollar marketplace, that billions of dollars are going to be dumped into R&D to make better batteries. So all you got to do is just live long enough to get the battery that you need, and then one day you wake up, you have a 2,000-mile car that charges in 20 minutes or 30 minutes through some sort of mega supercharger, and it lasts 20 years, and it's not very heavy. Now, it might take 50 years to get there, but that's where the trend is going. Just like when you looked at the vacuum tube and the transistor. When they first came out, they were very equivalent. Actually, the vacuum tubes were more reliable. But if you look at the fact that they could be made smaller and smaller and smaller, reliability was going to go up. It was no comparison. The trend said 20, 30 years, these guys are going to get creamed. And that's where Fairchild came from. And later on Intel, Gordy Moore tells this story better than anybody else. He said, I just looked at the trends, and I was like, this is what's going to happen. And now we're billionaires, and we live in Hawaii. Life is good. So that's what you have to do. And so when we look at the trends right now, what's happening? Connectivity is improving. The cost of connectivity is going down. So at some juncture, everybody's online, and they're online better, faster, and cheaper than even the universities were in the 1990s or military bases were in the 1990s. Okay, it's just going to happen. You don't have to pay for that. Okay, because entrepreneurs are entrepreneurs. Cost of computing is going down dramatically. Edge computing is happening. Everything's a computer now. Everything's computable. Yay. Okay, so you can get for the price $50, $100 what would be a supercomputer 20 years ago. That's not going to stop. We'll keep innovating, pushing. Moore's law is getting a little challenging because of physics, but we'll just cheat a little bit. We'll figure it out because we're humans. Even if we can't, we'll say we did. So if computing is super cheap and connectivity is super cheap, well, then the baseline infrastructure is there, and then you have to ask yourself, do we have platforms and systems without any government influence at all have attracted hundreds of millions to billions of users? The answer is yes. You have Facebook, and you have YouTube, and people watch cat videos. How many of you have seen a cat video in the last month? Show of hands. Be honest. Yeah, okay. Right. I know all of you did. Or at least someone you know has watched the keyboard cat. Okay, so it'll spread itself. And then what incentives do people have to spread it? Well, the people who build these things are geniuses at incentives architecture, choice architecture, and they create highly viral, highly addictive experiences. You might have your gateway drug be Angry Birds. You might have a gateway drug be Crypto Kitties. I'm building a video game. It's called Crypto Bison. I'm tokenizing the bison on my ranch. How about that? That'll be fun and exciting. So anyway, you have all these crazy things that happen, and once they're in, they're in. They have wallets. They have public-private key management. Eventually, you have an identity component. Once you have those components, what does that translate and mean? It means that you can reuse that base infrastructure again and again and again. So I don't need WHO or IETF or any transnational body or the ITU or somebody to come in and have some bold proclamation and a 5-year plan about how they're going to solve all the world's problems. I get very scared of 5-year plans about how to solve all the world's problems. Call me skeptical. I read a lot of history books as a kid. All I need is just to look at trends and ask, are they moving in the direction that the adoption of this technology is friction-free? And then ask myself, are there financial incentives to spread this technology to as many people as possible? And in both cases, the answer is yes. So all I need to do is just give it away. So every single thing we do is patent-free, royalty-free, Creative Commons license. We've written 117 papers, mostly peer-reviewed. All those papers have no patents or intellectual property behind them. Somebody's going to take something we've written, built, and done to build some amazing newfangled thing. We've already seen it in our own industry. People praise Polkadot. The engine that runs Polkadot is Ouroboros Browse with some modifications. We invented that protocol. Silicon Valley loves Fly Client. They say, oh, that's great. Well, that's NEPA-POWs. We came up with that. When you give away your work, you can't complain. You feel honored, right? That's the point of the academic process, that somebody found some use and utility for it, and they can change the world for it. So all we need to do is just keep doing what we're doing, which is make their experiences better, figure out ways to deal with these legacy issues that are extremely complicated and difficult, automate regulation where and when it's possible, and just wait for connectivity and computing to become so ubiquitous that it's obvious for all these things to work. Then you'll have some left behinds and edge cases. You always have Amish in society, and that's okay. They make society fun and interesting, and ultimately they don't have an impact or influence over the overall arc of the human race. And my goal is the more peaceful world. Next question.
Hi, Charles.
I
Randall
love the
Lee
man
Pires.
bun. I love the man bun.
19 years.
19 years?
Yes, sir.
How old are you?
37.
Okay. You look like you're 30, so.
Half Asian.
There you go.
Asian. So Randall Lee Pires, I actually lived in Africa for 7 years. I was the internet guy from 2008 to 2015 until
Okay.
last country went into civil war, South Sudan. Now I'm co-founder of Emirate Inc. Emirate.io, we're the #1 global distributor of helium, IoT, and soon-to-be 5G devices. We actually give it out for free to people, and then help them.
We've run into you guys indirectly through Dish. We just announced the Dish partnership, and the Dish guys were all fans of helium. It was pretty cool.
Yeah. So we're the #1 spreader of that network, and considering the good kind, beneficial spreading.
That's what they all say.
So considering, the One Belt Road project from China to Europe, 3,000 miles of, high-speed rail and fiber optics, and then also they're the, largest investor in Africa, 10-1 to the next largest investor, which is USA. I'm just curious to your thoughts on China's, multiple bans and the most recent ban on crypto.
It goes back to my original comments. Societies that hate freedom hate crypto. It's just that simple. You cannot admit a technology that pushes power to the edges and says you should be in control of your own life, and then in the same breath say we need social credit, the Great Firewall, and a dictator. You just can't have that. It doesn't work, because the minute that somebody does and says something that's outside of the orthodoxy of the government, they have to be punished. Crypto prevents them from doing that. So it's predictable, and it's actually a good indication that we're walking down the right road. I'd rather be on the side of people who want to give as many people as possible freedom and liberty than the side that want to take freedom and liberty from as many people as possible. Now, what impact will this have on the marketplace? Absolutely none. First, they banned it every year. It's banning season. You know, it's almost like the hobbits. We're like, oh, it's time for second breakfast. It's time for second banning. And then afternoon banning, and then supper banning, and then lunch banning. They ban it every week, you know, and okay, great. You know, the Communist Party will still have hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin of their crypto assets. They just keep them abroad. There's a reason why there are so many skyscrapers in Toronto. It has a lot to do with that remittance cycle. And, you know, as for Africa and other places, we do see a lot of debt diplomacy there. We do see a lot of encouragement to use the People's Bank of China's currency, and they are building a digital currency, and we only think that's going to expand. But ultimately, nation states, individuals, and companies have to make a decision. Do they want to do business with counterparties who are constrained by rule of law, morality, and the common good of society, or do they want to do business with dictators? It's a basic decision, and we as consumers should hold companies accountable. And if we can't, we should use systems that can't be evil just to make sure that we hold people accountable. So I think there's always a marketplace for crypto. Where crypto gets really interesting is actually in the CBDC space, because this is the first time where you actually can construct synthetic assets that are transnational but somehow national. And what I mean by that is we created something called JED. It's an algorithmic stablecoin, and we did a hyperloop where we wrote all the paper and did all the research, but then we just gave it out to the world, and now other people are building that design. But you can collateralize JED with any asset. So you can create wrapped versions of anything you want. You can have wrapped Bitcoin and wrapped Ether, wrapped data, and then you can, on the other side of the design, peg it to anything you want. A basket of currencies, to the US dollar, to the euro, or some other instrument, going to what you're discussing, which is a great innovation in monetary. So when we talk to CBDCs, it's like, hey, we want to create that. Not only can you create something like that, but then you also can start having other great conversations. Like, wouldn't it be cool to have universal basic income, or at least experiment with it? Well, what if you created a system where every time a transaction happens outside of the country, let's say you're doing it for Mauritius or Madagascar or something, a transaction fee happens, and that goes into a sovereign wealth fund. Free transactions within the economy. So zero tax, zero effect on your people. It's kind of like a tourism tax, but for money. Interesting concept. And it fills up a sovereign wealth fund, and every quarter you do a distribution to all your people. And how do you do it? Well, they have identity, they have wallets, they have all this infrastructure. So they get it. It's like a dividend. It just appears in their wallet like an airdrop every quarter. And so every person in the nation state now has an incentive for the money of the nation to be used outside of the nation, because it's actually creating wealth for the nation, that very process and use. Right now, when dollars are floating around the rest of the world, they don't really do that. Going back to that secondary market for royalties that was discussed earlier. I love monetary policy and finance conversations. So these are the kinds of things I think are much more meaningful than, okay, well, this Belt and Road thing that China's building, what is that going to do? And China banning cryptocurrencies, what's that going to do? I does not care. I really don't. Because that has no influence over the broader conversation of monetary innovation, the broader conversation of how do we do monetary experiments like UBI. And China has to answer for its sins in this respect. As these experiments succeed and they build a better, safer, greater community, they have to explain to their own people why they're denied that. It reminds me of some KGB propaganda way back in the day. So they used to go around and try to terrify people, and so they take pictures of the Bronx and other places and really like the projects, really poor communities, and then they say, this is what capitalism does. Look at all the inequality in America and how bad life is. And the really astute Soviets would look really closely and they'd say, but they have color TVs. You can't lie. People are smart and so forth. And the truth has a way of working its way through. And if you can create CBDCs that can move anywhere and satellite connections, no matter what firewalls you construct, people will build alternative systems. Underground newspapers will form. People will inform each other and so forth. So they can ban it. All it's doing is destroying their own legitimacy, their competitiveness, and their ability to grow as an economy, and ultimately probably will lead to the collapse of the regime if this technology is wide-scale adopted and becomes a global standard. Next question.
How you doing, Charles? My name is Umar Khan. I'm from Miami. Real quick, I just wanted to get your thoughts on the Miami coin and basically what it was able to do for my hometown, raising $5 million. And do you see yourself maybe participating in something similar with a guy like Mayor Suarez in the future?
I know Francis. You know, last time I was in Miami, he was extremely gracious, and then I had a problem with one of my hotels. He actually messaged me over Twitter. He sent me a private message. I was like, wow. This is like, what city does the mayor come out to you and like help your hotel problems? This guy's awesome. He's probably going to be governor of Florida one day. Yeah, well, that's the next step. And he's got some good guys behind him, like Marcello from SoftBank and so forth. So there's some goodness there. And I think Miami is competing with the death of California. So what's happening is the people in California, Silicon Valley, they're getting hammered, and they're just like, we're done. And so they're trying to decide where to move. And right now there's two cities that are very attractive, Miami and Austin. So, you got Joe Rogan and, Elon Musk and these other guys, they're going over to Austin. But there's actually a lot of people that are flowing over to Miami. And what the mayor's trying to do is say, well, hey, maybe we can get a special kind of entrepreneur. There's $2 trillion of wealth in the cryptocurrency space. Well, let Austin take some of it. If I get the crypto wealth, that'll make Miami do real well. So it's smart. And he's got some very good people behind him. And the point of things like Miami Coin, it's less about how much money is raised or what it does. It's about a marketing exercise. We're talking about it. You brought up Miami because of that, right? So mission accomplished, man. Yeah, and so it brings a lot of people in. It creates a lot of innovation. Even if they screw it up, it's still an interesting thing. And ultimately, it will put Miami on the map. So I think he's brilliant at marketing. He's got great execution capabilities, super nice guy, and he's very friendly to entrepreneurs that come. Florida has no state taxes. It's a great startup environment. There's a lot of talent in Florida. There's a lot of transplants that have come down from New Jersey and New York in particular, and they're moving there. And we're actually starting to see a really nice fintech industry that's forming in Miami and other places like Tampa and so forth. I'm a little biased. My mom grew up in Winter Haven, so we got a little bit of Florida roots there. We still have some family out in Florida. But yeah, I think it's a positive development. That said, I'm a cowboy. Still got my boots on and flew in from Wyoming. So if I had to pick, I'm in Wyoming, and there's no way I'm ever going to go out there because I just love the culture, love the people. But that's the great part about America is we have so much diversity, and you don't actually have to make compromises. You can kind of live where you want to, and we all can get along in our own way. And there's a lot of great Florida-based cryptocurrency companies that we have relationships with, we talk to on a regular basis. And as that grows as a crypto hub, it only helps the United States and helps the cryptocurrency industry. Next question. Yes, ma'am.
Hey, I'm Kathy Dashe, GBA. You mentioned something about UBI as if it was a good thing, but isn't UBI kind of like welfare?
It is and it isn't. It depends on how you do it. So UBI, the wrong way, is to print money and give it to people. That's just called inflation. It's like when the Romans threw bread to people at the Colosseum. That destroys society. UBI, when it's a sovereign wealth fund, says your government's pretty smart, and what they've done is they've created a pool of money that comes from something outside of taxing the people or printing money. They've, like Sovereign Wealth Fund of Norway, good investments, it's $1.7 trillion, $1.4 trillion, huge amount. And what we're doing is we're just giving the people of the nation a dividend because they're kind of shareholders in such a fund. So some people like Andrew Yang think you should go even further and just do a freedom dividend and somehow it's going to work. I'm not that egregious in my economic understanding. I think it's probably a better idea to pull back and say if you can create an instrument that can create collective wealth through something outside of your economy, it's equivalent to direct foreign investment when you actually look at the economic models and run the numbers. So it's promising. The other thing is that you also can start talking about incentive-based currencies when you talk about UBI. So what incentive do you have right now to recycle or to do the environmentally sustainable things or to prevent the panda from going extinct? Or I guess it's the koala now because of all the Australia fires. Poor koalas. So what incentive do you have? Very little outside of the grace and goodwill of your heart. And some people, Americans in particular, we're actually the biggest donor culture in the world. We have the biggest hearts of anybody in the world. But even so, it's a relatively small amount of all commercial activity. The cow will never go extinct because we eat it. People make money from it, you see, so it's very plentiful. Things that have no economic value tend to be charity cases or regulatory cases. So the real power of our industry is you can start having much more nuanced conversations about the notion of money. And you can create incentive schemes. Like, for example, think about the proliferation of alternative energy. Right now, it's not necessarily fully cost competitive, especially when you look at the baseload considerations of alternative energy, because it's not just about the generative cost, you also have to store it because it's intermittent, okay, for most alternative energy. Geothermal, hydroelectric are baseload. Well, what if when you generate alternative energy, in addition to generating your kilowatts, you also generate some sort of credit, like a renewable energy credit or something? Now you have two products. You sum those up, if there's a marketplace for the credit, then suddenly you make more money running alternative energy than you would coal. And more people investing, building, entrepreneurs come in, they say, well, we need to make solar panels cheaper. We need to be better at this baseload thing. The cost goes down over time, and eventually, even without the credit, the market becomes more competitive. And this is what finance professors and economists and other people study, and they come up with all kinds of schemes. The problem with these schemes is they're so difficult in practice to implement, because all the different businesses and government agencies and wallet structures are fragmented. So even if you want to create a carbon credit system, it's not global, or it won't apply here, or there's an audit and oversight problem, and so forth. The UBI question is very similar to this. Because the same mechanism that you can do a distribution to everybody is the same mechanism where you can incentivize everybody, every industry, have common marketplaces for these types of things. So the mere conversation of that allows you to create numerous incentive things. The same for extinction. I'm probably going to invest in that woolly mammoth company. We're in discussions with those guys. I want to bring the mammoth back. Come on. Everybody does. It's a cool idea, but the real value is every single year so many species go extinct. Because the places they go extinct in, the governments just simply don't have the money to save them. Okay, so how do you create a system where you can incentivize people to keep animals alive? Almost like a reverse life insurance policy, where they get paid while they're there and they stop getting paid when they're not. Then suddenly poachers get shot instead of welcomed. That type of stuff, huge problem. So they're all interconnected. They all run on the same rails, and the point is you can run those experiments. And what's great is you get beautiful, pure data that's politically neutral. It's not corrupted by some agency or bureaucracy, because it all lives out in an audible, transparent, time-stamped place. It amazes me that more finance professors, economists don't recognize one of the value propositions of Bitcoin is every single transaction that's ever happened since the system's been launched in January 3rd of 2009 is known. We have no other economic system in the world where all transactions since the beginning of time are known. You only get approximations and estimations and extrapolations. It's super hard. There's a whole field of science that studies this. Johns Hopkins has a great data science department. Bloomberg had something to say about that. Good program. And they think about these types of things. How do we build a reasonable experiment? How do we get our margin of error? Well, there's no margin of error with this. It's like you have the entire data set. You do polls and you try to get an understanding of what people feel. What if you could poll every person instantly for a system? It's there. So they're all interconnected in that way. But I'm not a fan of inflationary monetary policy. I'm not a fan of printing money out of thin air. I'm not a fan of a lot of monetary policy that we have. I think actually it doesn't hurt me at all. I can go talk to Goldman Sachs and these other guys and make great returns when high inflation is here. It hurts the poor people. And it's an evil, pernicious sin to the poor. It devastates them because they can't save, they can't invest, they spend their entire paycheck and their wages don't go up. And UBI doesn't solve that if you have an inflationary policy and the UBI comes from basically printing money. If you have new capital that's being injected, it's a collective wealth increase. And it's a different story, especially if there's a constrained monetary policy. Next question. Yes, sir. What is your name? What is your purpose?
My name is Ryan Abitsky. I'm a technology education teacher, vice principal, and I work for a STEM company. My question pertains to African innovation in regards to educational reform. Are there plans in place to support the youth, the current African children youth, to grow their knowledge in blockchain and what's helping to support the innovation going on throughout the country?
Yeah, a lot of the agendas we see are like, Transform Africa or Ethiopia 2025 or other documents. They usually cite the whole concept of a fourth industrial revolution or some idea of a collection of emerging technologies that are not here today, but they'll be here tomorrow. And there's an effort to try to train people to have those jobs. Because if you're training them for the jobs of today, by the time the pipeline is over, those jobs of today have transformed to the jobs of the future, and you're not competitive. So we definitely do talk to a lot of education ministers. In fact, the program in Ethiopia is about credential verification. It's right now K through 12. Our hope is to expand it across the entire higher education system. But there's a huge problem. You have these people, they spend years of their lives getting bachelor's degrees and PhDs and all these great credentials, and then the problem is the moment they finish, to verify those credentials for a foreign employer is exceedingly difficult. And they say, well, I don't really want to spend 2 months trying to figure out if you have a degree or not. I'm just going to hire the other guy. It's a huge competitive disadvantage. And so if you can create a system where you can actually verify the person is a graduate, what licenses they have, certifications they have, then you can start having a conversation about, okay, well, how do we first make more competitive educational units? In the MOOC industry in the United States, we have things like nano degrees from Udacity and these types of things. It's very easy to port those concepts and principles and bring them into the blockchain space. And there's actually been people who have done that, like MIT and so forth. So that's where we live, is really on the infrastructure and identity layer. And then you kind of let the academic institutions, the regulatory bodies, the certification bodies, and so forth build on top of that. And then what you have is a universal credential that's portable. Okay, it's not controlled by some ministry somewhere. You can move it anywhere as the employer-employee relationship, and you can verify that that's there. Then, because the credential is not controlled by a university, and because the credential is not controlled by some ossified body, you can start innovating in the credentials. You can start saying, why does it take 4 years to do something that maybe should only take 6 months? We see this a lot with developer training. You have these Hack Reactor and these other places, and they spend 6 months to 9 months to train a programmer as an alternative to a bachelor's degree in computer science. It's a faster pipeline, and it allows you to retrain people in West Virginia, other places that may have been displaced because the coal mine shut down, to another industry. So I think these types of ideas can be repurposed and reused, and they can be scaled down in cost because they're near free. Everything MIT does these days is on OpenCourseware. All the Coursera classes are mostly free, if you think about it. And a lot of stuff is on YouTube. If you want to learn about Babylonian mathematics and their sexagesimal system, there's actually lectures on YouTube about this from some crazy guy who's an ultra-finitist. He's a nice guy. And it's good math. It's actually a lecture that you'd probably take at Yale or Harvard in a very specialized class. It's like a survey class in grad school that you kind of have to take for a master's requirement. You're like, okay, that sounds like fun. I'll learn about Egyptian fractions and Babylonian math. Now that's free, and it's online, and everybody can consume it, and it's there. But the problem is right now, when you consume it, you can't prove to the world that you know it. What we're building as an industry is that you can. And then you and the employer are going to kind of figure out if that's useful for the job or not. And people want to be free. People want to make money. People are capitalists. They're going to do what they need to do to take care of themselves. They always do. I'm a libertarian like that. Not too popular in a place like D.C. Okay.
Hello.
Who else?
I'm Paul Dowding from L4S Corporation. Just a question in similar theme, which is I applaud all your efforts, and certainly in terms of encouraging and giving things away, but ultimately we have to earn a return from our labor. And so where's that line between the giving away and the charging?
You know, my grandfather was OBGYN, pre-Medicare, and then he practiced after Medicare, and he's like really hated the new system. Before Medicare, his model was if they can pay, charge him. If they can't, don't. Pretty simple model. He made more money in that model than he ever made billing an insurance company or the federal government. And that's what we do. So we give away all the research, all the engineering, but we work with Fortune 250 companies like Dish and nation states, and they can pay. And you charge for transformational services. And they can pay in the 8, 9, 10 figures. Okay, they have that scale. And what you do is you come in, you build bespoke solutions. Because no matter what you do, it's not blockchain native. You have to build interoperability bridges. They mentioned HIPAA-compliant blockchain. If you're really serious about getting involved in medical records, there's a lot of infrastructure that one would have to build and construct, as these GPA guys know, to actually even have the mere thought that you're HIPAA compliant. And then you have to actually verify that and so forth, and there's oversight. Who pays for that? Well, the people who can. And if you have a business model where you can coexist and the things that you do you can give away at the same time, that's for everybody. Because if other people start using that technology, they're probably going to contribute to that technology, and when they do, your products get better. Look at Android. You know, Google makes it, but yet Samsung contributes to it, as do dozens of other companies. They're competitors. They fight all the time. Even Apple and Microsoft are making contributions to Android at its base layer. And they're brutal competitors, yet they're making each other's technology better and so forth, and no one can debate the profitability of Android as a platform to Google and what they've done there. The other thing is that you can add middlemen of desire into the system. So no matter how good your offering is in decentralization, there are going to be cases where you need to inject people in who are service providers to make the transaction better. That's where lawyers come from and accountants come from. All these service providers come from. You bring them in to protect you. You bring them in to put some insurance into the system so that if something happens, you can recover from a failure state. It could be estate planning. It could be all kinds of things. You need sometimes structures that are curated. And if that happens, it's a SaaS product or it's a service product. It's a transaction fee. There's all kinds of money models that you can have. So far, it's worked out pretty well for a lot of people in the industry, and it's created a multi-billion-dollar industry of sustainable companies. We have over 500 employees. We're profitable. I've never had a venture capitalist. I own 100% of my own company. We're doing good. All right, who else? Yes, ma'am.
I don't have a microphone, but I really admire what you're doing as a business owner. And I want to come from that perspective because I've been a business owner. And I've gotten screwed over. I've been in the music business, and I've gotten screwed over by, you know, all kinds. I can get into that, but I won't. But that's what got me into real estate and, you know, kind of left that business because it wasn't really regulated.
Right.
I need your help, regulators. But it wasn't really regulated. You know, people say there are these people that can do all these things for you and whatever, and you spend money, and they say music hopefuls and this and that, and people get taken advantage of a lot. Right. So needless to say, it kind of, you know, I was singing since I was a child, and it just really crushed my dream. So I left that industry and went into real estate, which, you know, doing very successful. My fiance and I, we both have a real estate industry that we, you know, find businesses and stuff like that, properties and commercial properties. But what advice would you give to an aspiring entrepreneur that's looking to make change like you've been doing?
Right.
That's my main question that I would like to know. Thank you.
Yeah, first I empathize with you on the music industry. That's a den of vipers. You know, I was just at my conference over in Wyoming, and we had Paul Oakenfold there, and it's a weird thing. I actually was on stage with him, which was strange. But we had that conversation because he's been around the music business since the 80s. Every single person who's been in the music business has the same experience and story of you. You get screwed somewhere. There's a reason why Prince was a symbol for a little while. Yeah, people get screwed. So actually, one of the conversations we had was how do we transform that industry so that it's more artist-centric, and there are ways to monetize that were previously impossible, and the terms and conditions don't change. Because oftentimes you're told one thing, it's like an Army recruiter, oh yeah, everything's great, sign on the dotted line. Oh, I'm sorry, you're gonna be a rifleman. Okay, so it happens. No offense to recruiters. But anyway, you know, what you have to do is you have to create rules and logic where what you agree to, you sign up for, what you think you own, you actually own. And that's protected by the integrity of the system itself. So for example, NFTs, they're starting to percolate through the entire music business. We talked to Billy from ZZ Top and all these other people, and there's tons of artists that are exploring NFTs, issuing NFTs, some on Cardano, other places. But what's nice is when you create it, you can put royalty tails on them. So every single time it transfers, the money goes to you. There's no middleman there. There's no handshake, I trust you. No, it goes to your wallet, these types of things. The other thing is, music and creative endeavors are all about flow, and you're in a mood or you're not. And if you're feeling really cool, you want to do a concert, well, you can't. You have to plan those things. You have to bring people together. And then again, you have more middlemen, more stuff between you and your fans, your audience, the people that you want to have a relationship with. One of the things I love about this industry is I do AMAs. Some people watch them, and I just do whatever I want. Sometimes 1 o'clock in the morning, I'm wearing a house robe, and I'm like, yeah, let's do an AMA. I'm feeling it. This is great. The people in Japan will watch. They're up. And I do an AMA, and it's fun. And, you get a great feedback and interaction. Well, what if you have microtransactions and tipping? So you just do an impromptu concert in the metaverse, and people directly interact with you. There's no promoter, there's no concert venue, any of these things. And you have a million fans, 2 million fans. They start giving you pennies every time you do something interesting. You add that up, that's like 100 grand, 200 grand, 300 grand. For a performance you do at 2:30 in the morning. Because you're in it, you feel it, these types of things. So these are the types of models that are coming as a consequence of our industry, and they're here to stay, and what they do is they rebalance the scales. Why? Because there's the smart cow effect. So what is a smart cow? It's a DRM term that we have. It's not the collective intelligence of the swarm of the cows that defeats your fence. It's the one smart cow that knows how to unlatch it. The minute the cow does it, all the cows can get out. So similarly, it's not the collective intelligence of everybody who uses the system that's going to decide if the system's secure or not. It's just one person figuring out how to break the system. The minute one person defeats DRM, you have bootleg DVDs. You get Game of Thrones on BitTorrent, these types of things. Well, that same thing applies to getting screwed in a business. The minute that somebody discovers how to protect you from getting screwed, and that's open sourced, you can take that logic and put it into your future business relationships. And you don't have to know the secret lawyer from Beverly Hills or something like that to figure that out. It's just there. It's open source. So what happens over time is it's like an immune system. And there's only so many ways you can screw somebody inside a system. People try. Believe me, I've encountered this. But eventually you get pretty good. You get a healthy immune system. You're able to protect yourself. And then future artists and entrepreneurs can learn these things. So I do a lot of startups. We have our own venture capital firm. It's small. It's only about 30 million under management. But we all the time get hundreds of business plans, and we do a lot of angel investing, impact investing, and these types of things. And I ask the same basic questions. Do you have a founder's agreement? Do you have a full understanding of the person you're getting into bed with? Would you trust this person with your kids? Do you have these documents and these templates? Do you do a business model canvas? All this stuff. All that's all about is its immune system to basically protect the founders, to make sure that they fully appreciate and understand the hell they're about to sign themselves up with. And I admire you, music and real estate, 2 incredibly difficult businesses to survive in. The fact you're still standing says you got some grit, but most people up front don't know that what they're signing on the dotted line for. So educating people up front and separating the wantrepreneur from the entrepreneur is a huge component of it. And if they're a true entrepreneur, give them the resources that they need, and almost all of those are now online and free. Osterwalder and Pinheiro, the business model canvas generation, lean startup from Eric Ries, there's dozens of these things, tons of free classes on YouTube and so forth, and they're well propagated. I was at a startup center in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia that ICE Addis was running. I walk by and I see Steve Blank's book and the Osterwalder Pinheiro's book and the business model canvases on the wall. Okay, so that's well spread, and that's well propagated. And these don't make you successful, but what they do is they help you navigate and avoid failure. And if you're patient and methodical, it helps you slowly but surely work your way through getting to whatever your notion of success is. The missing piece of the ingredient, and this is something in 21st century we have to be better at. Silicon Valley is horrible at this, as are Fortune 500 companies, because of misaligned incentives. The pursuit of entrepreneurship should never be the raw acquisition of value. It should be solving problems and helping people along the way. That's the way you have to view it. And it's the point of things like benefits companies, triple bottom line, these types of things. There are concepts that go beyond the corporation, the LLC, of business structures that are baked in. And if you start with a philosophy and you actually have integrity baked into the system, actually you end up being more successful. Every time in my life, in my professional career, that I've accomplished something great, it started because I gave something away first, not because I took something. In this industry, how did I get started? Does anybody know? Anybody want to guess? It was a class. Bitcoin or how I learned to stop worrying and love crypto. I created a free class. I gave it away. I got 70,000 students, 5,000 emails. Turned out one of them was an entrepreneur, a venture capitalist. Calls me up and says, hey, my name's Li Shai Lao. I'm from China. I'd like to give you some money to start something up. I was like, I don't know about that. Doesn't seem legit. Weird internet guy wants to give me money. Okay, what's the catch? Turned out he was real. Go figure. That's what got me started. But the only reason I had that relationship is I gave the class away for free. If I charged 99 cents, he wouldn't have signed up for it. He signed up for it because it was free and I gave it under a Creative Commons license. So the point is, to give, you shall receive. That's the mentality that you have to have and you have to have baked in, and then you inspire people to work with you. There's a lot of great businesses that are exploring new business models. Like, I'd encourage you to look into Valve. They're a very innovative company, and they wrote their entire business model down. Most people know them through their products like Half-Life and the Steam game platform and so forth. And they kind of figured out a completely different way of running a company. Holacracy is another model for running a company. There's dozens of different business models there. There's a lot of cooperative companies. They say, we don't even have a CEO. We make decisions from the bottom up instead of the top down. Who wouldn't want to work for a business where you own part of the business and you have equal say and fairness baked into it? It's not like collect at the top if you get successful or something like that. And what that does is it makes you resilient. And it makes people willing to share their wisdom and their knowledge and their abilities with you. And also, it makes people feel really shitty if they try to screw you, because they're hurting not just you, but a whole collective of people. And there's no way they come out of that without a reputation scathed and damaged. And that's just how it should be. So, you know, hang in there. And if you don't have scars, you're not an entrepreneur. It's hard. If you don't know drinking games, you're not an entrepreneur either. You know, just as a side, completely unrelated, but it's a cool story, so I'll tell it because I'm tired. They had this in China, so there's this crazy drinking game where they have a circular table and a lazy Susan in the center and a glass bowl full of live scorpions. It's a true story. And what you do is you grab a chopstick and you grab the scorpion by the tail, it's kind of wriggling around, and it's got its pinchers, and you let the pinchers hit you here, and you roll it out, and you bite down on the live scorpion, then you take a shot. And you put the shot glass down, and you go in a circle. That's one round, and it's last man standing. These are the kinds of drinking games that define who shall be successful in business or not. Sometimes you just got to bite down on that scorpion. I have pictures, so I'll show you pictures. All right. Right. What happens in China stays in China. Sometimes it doesn't. All right, next question. Come on, I'm not going to be back in DC for a while. I hate this place. I like the people, but come on, the people who run the show aren't so nice.
Quick question.
Yes, sir.
There's some entrepreneurs in the space who are concerned because the SEC is starting to flex, and so they are getting pause in terms of, for a pun, the newly minted crypto people who have liquid capital that are willing to invest in some of these startups are taking a step back because they're concerned that there could be some comeuppance, if you will, if Gensler decides to get his way. Is there any way in which some of the larger crypto organizations or blockchain organizations have said, hey, you know, we're willing to back some of you as entrepreneurs if you get into some legal red tape unbeknownst to yourself? For you guys to, I don't know about reinsurance, but in terms of being willing to back some of these smaller ventures to say, hey, if you think you're operating in good faith and you've built a system that we can audit and verify, we'd be willing to back you if the SEC decides to send you a no, you know, send you a letter
Right.
or take you to court.
Reminds me of that Eminem song. You just have to remix it. The SEC won't let me be. Feels so empty without me. It's true, right? You know, Inglourious Bastards is the other thing that comes to mind. It's like, you'll be shot for this. He's like, nah, I'm just going to get chewed out. I've been chewed out before. Come on, it's a great reference. Okay, so it's an interesting question of, okay, what level of collective liability sharing is this industry prepared to have? This is a bizarre industry. So, I just opened the Hoskinson Center for Formal Mathematics, and mathematicians, they're kind of weird people, but they're very nice and gracious, and everybody's excited to work together, and all these different institutions are ready to go, and they're already exchanging emails, and we're talking about books that we want to write and all this cool stuff. I'm like, yeah, that's fun. You go into the cryptocurrency space, and you have Bitcoin maximalists and Ethereum maximalists, all these people, and it's not like they don't just disagree with you. They're like, that dude is evil. He's a narcissistic sociopath, pathological liar, who's a criminal, and if you trust him, you'll lose all your money. And that's Tuesday. And then you add social media on top of that. Oh, God, have you been on crypto Twitter? Oh, it's horrible. And then 4chan is just like, they're just sitting in the back watching shit burn. They love what they do. So it really does make collaboration, cooperation hard. And when the CEO of Google and Microsoft criticize each other, they're like, my product is better than your product. Yeah, you guys don't know what you're doing. In this industry, it's like, that guy should be in jail. When you say these things and you're overly harsh and partisan, it makes collaboration, cooperation extremely difficult. The other thing is that people don't seem to think that they have an obligation to transparency, integrity, and disclosure. So you're asking, oh, well, we should protect people from the evil SEC. And say, okay, all right, well, then who should we protect and under what circumstances as an industry should we get involved? Well, are these small startups prepared to disclose founder tokens, insider trading, all of these other things, get rid of all those information asymmetries? If they're willing to do that, well, then they're starting to look like a regulated business anyway, right? So there's kind of this catch-22 that's ingrained. The culture inhibits collaboration in a certain respect, and also the kinds of things you'd need to do to ensure that you're actually betting on a real thing rather than a scam starts making that thing look more and more like a regulated entity. So it's an interesting question. Now, I don't think for a moment that the Securities Exchange Commission or FinCEN or the CFTC or any of these other branches of the Treasury Department wake up every day like twirling these mustaches saying, oh, how can I kill this industry? Ah, yes, let's do some evil. No, I mean, they're people. And really, they would say, okay, what's going on? And when you ask them, because a lot of them are very smart people, they read House of Morgan and all these other lovely books from Ron Chernow, and they say, well, we see the same things in the cryptocurrency space that we saw during the baronial age of the 19th century with banking. We see wash trading, we see boiler rooms, we see insider trading, we see trusts forming, and these are the kinds of things that led to the Knickerbocker crisis, and later on to the Great Depression, the collapse of 29. So they say, well, the whole reason we exist was to make sure these things don't happen again. But the problem is they're crippled by the fact that the laws that empower their regulatory authority are not designed for the innovations of our industry. So they're trying to hammer something because the only thing they have is a hammer and they need a screwdriver. They need some more nuance here, okay? They're trying as delicately as they can to pound, but it's a lot easier to have fine manipulation with a screwdriver, right? So they don't have that ability right now. And so you can see the pain in Gensler's face and the Commission's face in a certain respect. Because they say, look, guys, if we do nothing, you get hey, 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 pick an act, right? You get all these crazy things. You get all these scams and things, and then you look at NFTs, you say, does anybody know where some of these valuations for NFTs are coming from? It's money laundering. It's really easy. So you create an NFT of a rock or something like some rando JPEG you find, and then suddenly a random person on the internet bought it for $4 million. Look, I just created $4 million. It's totally legitimate. I got paid for this NFT I created. Well, what if you're the random person on the internet buying it from yourself? And you just record it as if it was a foreign transaction. Suddenly that illegitimate money you have is not real. The perspective of that happening, just the idea of that happening, is enough to delegitimize and call for regulation in that marketplace. I see it all the time, the alluvial mining industry, the gold mining industry, Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, other places. People buy gold mines out there. You know why? Because they can just go and take their drug money, prostitution money, all these things, buy gold through cash transactions, take it to the mine and say it's yield. Look, we just got 400 troy ounces of gold out of our alluvial deposits. I guess Barrick was wrong. Yeah, there you go. It's real money. Think about it. People clever. Criminals are clever. And regulators, this is what they have to deal with every single day, all day long. Some dude who's got a fucking PhD in screwing people, just like sitting down thinking about this. And he's got on speed dial all of his network, and they're all like, yeah, this is how you do it. This is how you, and they all talk to each other, and they create. We run into my industry with giveaway scams. God, I want to kill these people. I really do. If I can find a way to just push a button and make them all disappear, I would. Why? What do? They take my videos on YouTube. They hack a YouTube channel. They put my videos on with an overlay screen saying, Charles Hoskinson's giving away ADA. Send ADA and we'll give you twice as much back. And it's like, what kind of an idiot would fall for this? And I make video after video saying, I'm not giving away ADA. I'm not giving away ADA, again and again and again. And you know what happens? Every day I get an email. Hey, I just sent 1,500 ADA, 3,000 ADA to your giveaway. How come I didn't get any back? And it's like the Picard facepalm. You're just like, oh, God, come on, people. And you just make videos, you do these things. And you know what really bothers me is on YouTube, it's trending. So if you search my name on YouTube, giveaway, right now, you pull out your phone, you can see, you'll probably see a giveaway video. Go ahead and do it for me. See if we see a giveaway video. Do we have one? Okay, drum roll. How's the Wi-Fi in here? Pretty good? Okay, what's the first result when you Google my name? Charles Hoskinson giveaway.
Oh, Google, not YouTube.
Yeah, YouTube.
Oh, on YouTube?
Yeah, search a YouTube video.
On YouTube now, it does have videos of you saying it's a scam.
Yeah, but you look a little down inside the videos. What do you see?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, click it. And what do you see?
It says original. Okay, this video is confusing. It says huge warning to ADA investors. Charles Hopkins, don't ever fall for this.
Yeah, okay, so if you search through, you'll find at least one or two. They take them down.
Yeah, I see it.
Right there.
Cardano giveaway, scam. How did they do it? Huge news.
Yeah.
Scam. 100 million ADA giveaway scam alert.
Yeah. And we make videos and we tell everybody, and every day they recreate them because they're created automatically and they're completely out of touch. The same for ransomware and all this other stuff. So I wake up every day and say, where the hell is the FBI? And why aren't we class action lawsuiting YouTube? Because they actually make money. In some cases, these are advertised videos, sponsored videos. When people click them, YouTube monetizes it and makes money. So there's no recourse. Steve Wozniak and Ripple, the co-founder of Apple and Ripple Labs, are both suing YouTube over giveaway videos. So I feel it, the industry feels it, the regulator feels it. We all have personal scars for these scams when you look into them, and they're horrible. And when they impact people, you make you sick to your stomach. Because usually what ends up happening is the people who fall victim to these types of scams are people, maybe their English competency is not so good. And they're having trouble understanding what's real and what's not real because they speak Italian or Spanish or some other language, and they think it's legitimate and real. And then when they fall for it, they lose their entire life savings or these types of things. So if you're a regulator, what's that? Yes, I've posted so many videos about this. Yes, I've posted, I think, 4 or 5 videos already. In fact, it got so bad I've been sometimes putting chirons at the bottom of my screen saying, I will never give away ADA, I'll never give away ADA. So if you're the FBI, you're the SEC, you're some regulatory body, and you sit there and you see the victims day after day after day getting hit and hurt. You get the emails, you get the complaints, you see the evidence, and you see the people who victimize people hanging around on yachts, having fun, doing cool stuff. Wouldn't you want to like burn these bastards? You know, so that's the problem here. Is my industry only sees it from one angle. We see it from the angle of these evil, mean regulators are coming after us to destroy everything. You have to have empathy. You asked about being an entrepreneur. That's another one of the most valuable things as an entrepreneur is how do you have empathy? You know, how do you understand the other person's position, where they're coming from? And so suddenly, then you can start talking around. You asked, like, how do we work together as an industry, these types of things. How do we as an industry come together and create common standards? Ethereum may hate my guts. Bitcoin may hate my guts, but they have giveaway scams too with Vitalik Buterin's face on it. Greg Maxwell and Adam Back at Blockstream, they're impacted by this. Elon Musk even gets impacted by this. Dogecoin giveaway, send your Doge here. The giveaways are pervasive throughout the whole industry. So maybe as an industry on that one thing, even though we hate each other, we can declare a peace and have a little bit of a jubilee and just work together and solve that particular problem. And this problem's only going to get it solved by the public-private partnership because you need law enforcement. That money has to go somewhere that's been stolen. It has to touch an exchange somewhere. You need KYT. You need some sort of regulatory component. And then you start asking questions, where did this money come from? Oh yeah, my brother gave it to me, $4 million worth. And all these transactions came from YouTube associated videos that are giveaway scams and things like that. When you start having those dialogues, then the regulators and law enforcement, they have empathy for you because they say, these are the good guys. They want to solve the problems. They want to work together with us and catch the bad guys. They're not scumbags. They don't hate us. They don't think we're bad people. Now, some won't. And the ones that don't reveal the other question is, who's corrupt? Because if you're willing to work, you're willing to come down and actually, in good faith, work with people, and for whatever reason the bureaucracy is working against you, it's because somebody's getting paid. Somebody's making money. You know, the Koch brothers are notorious in this town, but their dad was an interesting guy. He was one of the toughest dudes ever to come out of Texas. He came up with a patent to refine oil, and all the majors called him up, and they said, hey, we want to buy that patent. It's not optional. Got to do it. And he said, I'm from Texas. Go yourself. And anyway, they said, all right, we'll sue you. He said, under what grounds? He said, we don't care. We'll just make you broke. And he got sued all over the place, and it turned out the only place he lost, the judge had been bribed. But it bankrupted him. He's a tough guy. So you know what he did? He went to the Soviet Union, built refineries for Stalin. He made a lot of money doing it, came back to the United States and reopened Koch Industries, and now it's Koch, right? That dude was tough if you can survive the oil companies in Stalin. So sometimes the system works against you. And it's not fair, but if you're persistent and you keep pushing through, you can solve that problem. And we will see adverse bad regulation. The internet itself had bad regulation. 1992 NSF AUP, the National Science Foundation Acceptable Use Policy of the internet. They said you can't commercialize it, can't do e-commerce. And why did they say you can't do e-commerce? They said because if we allow e-commerce, the internet will become a cesspool of spam and pornography. And it did! But we have Amazon. And you can get it in 24 hours, right? So for everything you give, was that? Yeah. Same day. You can get your spam and pornography same day, it's true. From Amazon. Or one of its affiliates. That's the Philip Morris thing. They own Kraft Mac and Cheese and the cigarette company, Marlboro. Just the right hand, don't pay attention to the left hand. So anyway, it's a very nuanced, complicated problem, and I think it's not a solution to say we as an industry are going to band together and just protect the small guys. It's more nuanced. It's more you pick specific things that are reoccurring agency problems, from information asymmetries to retail investors being defrauded to just outright scams. OneCoin was a great example of this. I know a lot of people that run exchanges, especially abroad. I go to dinner parties with them. I look them straight in the face and say, why the no, not OneCoin, BitConnect, excuse me. And I said, why the fuck did you list BitConnect? We all know it's a Ponzi. So, yeah, but we're making a lot of money on the trading fees. You're legitimizing the victimization of people. That's when regulators get involved, and rightfully so. They're people too. All right, next question. Yes, sir, in the back.
Picking up on that last question, and you make a lot of great points about that there are scams out there that hurt real people and are giving, cost you or damage reputations. So, this is Washington, D.C., the standard approach industries take is to band together and lobby.
Yeah.
And, meet with regulators, meet with legislators, and say, look, here, we may hate each other for all these reasons, but here are 10 things we all agree on. And, for a fraction of the money it would cost to defend a bunch of little guys getting investigated by the SEC, you can go a long way. I mean, look, there's, the great American tradition. If you're an industry, you buy up enough senators and enough congressmen and enough regulators. I mean, look, they all want to go work for you after they retire. You can tell I'm a lawyer who's lived in Washington, D.C. too long. But,
so it's like Fonz with Jump the Shark. It's like Win Bitcoin, Goldman Sachs.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, I think, that seems to me that you guys need to be more active and be more proactive in going out there and saying, hey, instead of using a hammer, use a screwdriver. And by the way, there are people in this room, not me, but others who actually do that work.
Yeah, so let me tell you my own experiences with lobbying. It's deeply frustrating. So the infrastructure bill comes out, and everybody, after a little while, knows that they fucked up. And they say, oh, man, we got to fix that. And so, it was just a debate of how to fix it. So Rob Portman and Lummis and Toomey and these other people, they come together, they start their conversations, and eventually, after an enormous lobbying effort of the industry, there was a bipartisan consensus agreement that had 3/4 of the senators supporting it. Getting 3/4 of the senators in the United States to agree on anything is a really big challenge. My God, it's got to be like, should we give the Senate more money? I guess we'll get like 2/3 maybe. I mean, it's like, it's crazy to get that kind of agreement. But even the authors of the original language realized that they got it wrong and we need to fix it. Normal politics, you just fix the damn thing. But you know what happened? We got Shelby'd. We required unanimous consent, 100 senators, unanimous consent to be able to change the language. And some guy who's just about to retire from Alabama comes on up and says, unless you give $50 billion to the military, I object. And of course, Bernie Sanders shows up and he's like, oh, hell no. And that got killed. Lobbying solved the initial problem, which was the language was bad, let's fix it, and the political system was working. But now we're in a weirdo situation right now where the federal government is just not working well. It's on life support. And so we actually have 4 branches of government in the United States. Okay, we have the legislative, the executive, the judicial. That's what the Constitution gave us. But life hard, world hard, business hard, so we created the bureaucracy. And we have all these different agencies and government bodies, and they're not accountable to anybody. Okay, we, back to back, had 2 revolutionary presidents in a certain respect. We had Barack Obama come in, and he's like the outsider of outsiders. He had a supermajority in the Senate and the Congress. How many people from Wall Street went to jail? He had a mandate to do it, too. The bureaucracy stops that. Then, they made in a laboratory. Now, hang on.
It's not the bureaucracy. Wall Street stopped it.
And who control?
They give the money to the bureaucracy.
Yeah, it's an incestuous corporatist relationship. And let me finish. So then you have Trump coming. You couldn't have made a dude in a lab who's more outside of the system. Okay, he's a reality TV star. He's just, I'm just going to run for president. And he did, and he won. And everyone's like, is this a joke? The day after, I know a lot of ambassadors, they were calling the State Department saying, like, what do we do now? Like, what does this mean for America? And he comes in, he starts looking a lot like a traditional Republican president after a little while. Why? Because the bureaucracy moderates that whole thing. And you correctly identified that the masters of the bureaucracy live outside of the bureaucracy. We can debate on who those masters are, but they exist. And, oh no, I can't. I want to get rid of all of it. You don't trade a king for a king, you get rid of kings. That's the American way. You know, if you go to London, you know, Rod here came in from London, and he does a lot of great work with us. He just actually came in from Bermuda, but he lives in the UK. There's all these beautiful museums, and inside of they have the correspondence between King George and all the lords. And this was right at the close of the Revolutionary War. And they were kind of having a debate over what was going to happen with George Washington. So the common notion in the English aristocracy was he was going to become King of America. Okay, it was just a question of how is he going to address it, and what horse and pony show is he going to do, and so forth. And they said, well, the French are obviously going to recognize him, but at what point do we recognize him? And then they said, well, he has no kids that are his own, so obviously he's going to have to take a new wife, so maybe we play marriage politics. And they're really just discussing this whole thing. And then he's like, I resigned my commission. And he just goes back to become a farmer. And it's a big ceremony. And all the English were like, what the fuck just happened? It's like, nah, and then when he becomes president, they're like, that was it. He's now king. Okay, he's king for life. And then he leaves. And again, they're like, what the hell just happened? Like, this is not normal. Oh God, this is scary, French Revolution. And so that's what we do in America. We were founded on a principle of you don't create power structures that are equal to the power structures you're trying to replace. You decentralize them. You give power back to the people. The bureaucracy was created out of necessity because we're a global society. We have to deal with pandemics and wars and nuclear weapons and scientific research and all of these things. You need literally, for the scale of America, tens of millions of people working together to maintain America. And they don't really care who's president. They have a job to do, whether it's Trump or Obama or Biden, they just go to work. They're civil servants. And they keep thinking to themselves, what's in it for me when I retire? And there's some golden light on the other side. And it turns out because of that influence, sometimes policy gets pushed in a certain way to protect certain actors. So what you do is you get all of those things on a blockchain. You get all the flows of money on a blockchain. You get identity and all these things. You have real-time continuous auditing. There's all kinds of things you can do to change the bureaucracy. You also can break up the bureaucracy. Once it's more efficient, it can run state and local. It's a hell of a lot harder to bribe 1 million people than it is to bribe 10 people or 100 people, right? Especially if you have no notion of a secretary of or a chairman of. It's a bottom-up thing, and it's connected with a decentralized system. It's less corrupt by design. Country of Georgia is a great example of that. So if you're in an Eastern European country and you've pissed off a powerful person, the job they give you is clean up police corruption. Especially right at the fall of the Soviet Union. Okay, that was like the worst job in the entire world. So what do? They gave it to a guy named India. He was the finance minister. And he's like, all right, well, I've been good knowing everybody. So what he did is he trained an entirely parallel police force secretly. And he fired the entire police force and replaced it with an entirely new police force, but he had 2 of them. So he had one police for the policing stuff, and he banned the carrying of cash, and they had another police force to arrest any police officer they found with cash. Pretty simple. It's a systemic change. And over a very short period of time, the corruption started evaporating in the police force. Okay, well, if you think this way, you say, well, what other problems do we have? Well, corrupt cops make corrupt cops because, if you're not corrupt and you see other people doing corrupt things, you're like, I don't trust that guy. We should take care of that. The same for Major League Baseball with steroids. If you know all the other guys are doping, you got to dope because it's the only way you can win. You see, so a corrupt system makes corruptions. Systems that are by design not corrupt get rid of corruption. They don't tolerate it. They have an immune system to corruption. Okay, so that's what we're in the business of in the blockchain space. So I sure as hell do not want to go to K Street and hire some damn lobbyist to go talk to some politician and convince them to do something that when they pass the bill at the end of the day, they're delegating the authority to the bureaucracy anyway. Who is going to decide what the infrastructure bill means to America? Is it the Senate and the Congress? Probably not. It's the IRS. People I've never met, nameless in a bureaucracy somewhere, who say, well, what should we do? Maybe we could talk to them, maybe we can't talk to them. Who knows? How about we change that whole system so that it operates and runs differently and it has accountability by design at its core? It takes a little bit more time. We're doing it in Wyoming, law by law, and it's working quite well. And if enough states do it, if the federal government doesn't listen, we can just use Article 5 and have a constitutional convention and remind them that the government is the government of the states, not states are proxies of the federal government.
You're amazing. That's all I can say. Listen.